It is time to continue on with our season previews. Today we have the Ottawa Senators for this one today. The Senators are a team that finally broke back into the Stanley Cup playoffs last year after a nearly decade-long drought. And now it's time for Ottawa to write their new decade, and hopefully it's a good one. The 2025-26 season previews are underway here. We are talking about all 32 teams and previewing their upcoming seasons. We have done almost 3/4 of the National Hockey League. We have done Anaheim up to the Rangers alphabetically. So if you want to check those out, be sure to check out the playlist in the card above. But anyways, moving on now into the Ottawa Senators. The Senators are a team that finally broke into the playoffs last year after a long playoff drought. And seeing the progression and even sometimes regression of this Senators team has been truly wild to watch. Let's start off in 2022-23, where they went 39-35-8 for 86 points. They were 21st in the NHL. They missed the playoffs that year. It was an improvement from the years prior. And I feel like Senators fans look at that year and they're like, I don't know. But you can see there's real improvement there. They were only 4 games below 500, and things were looking all right for Ottawa at that point. Now, they would obviously trade away Alex DeBrincat. They would make some other moves as well. And then in 23-24, where some people expected they were going to take a step, they took a step backwards, not forwards. They went 37-41-4 for 78 points. They were 26th in the NHL. A highly disappointing season. DJ Smith got fired midway through. You had an intern in there, not an intern. They didn't have a college intern coaching the Ottawa Senators. But yeah, they had an interim in there to coach the team through the end of that season. They get to the end of that. They hire Travis Green. They trade for Linus Ullmark. They draft Carter Yakimchuk, which Senators fans are going to look on that draft in a couple of years and say, yeah, maybe it was a good thing we were bad. But regardless, Ottawa the following year with Travis Green would take a big step. They went 45-30-7 for 97 points. They were 12th in the NHL, and they made the playoffs. They went into round 1 against the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I thought they put up a pretty good fight. I know there were many people who said, like, oh, Toronto destroyed them. They were down 3-0 and such. The games were close. They weren't, like, massive blowouts every single time. The only game where I would say, like, I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, that's a blowout was Game 1. And Toronto, like, just outplayed them. That's really what it felt like. But the rest of the games were close. 3 of them went to overtime. 4 of them were separated by just 1 goal. So, again, like, that was a close series. And I was really impressed with the way Ottawa played, which is why I'm pretty high on them heading into next year. Looking at your management here for the Ottawa Senators, you have Steve Staios as the GM, who was hired at the beginning of 23-24. That was after Pierre Dorion was fired after the whole Evgeny Dadonov trade situation went down and how the Senators were taken away of a first-round pick. And Ann Lauer was like, nope, and he fired Pierre Dorion, and obviously Steve Staios became the general manager. I think he's done a good job. Again, I don't agree with all the moves he's made. He's made some ones where I've been like, I don't know about that. But I think overall, a lot of the moves he's made and a lot of the draft picks he's made as well have been very solid. Again, he brought in some guys like Lars Eller. He brought in Fabian Zetterlund. He brought in Ullmark as well, and I think that's really a big factor there. So he has made a lot of good moves for the Ottawa Senators over his time. And then Travis Green, who was hired at the beginning of last season, I was reluctantly surprised at the way Travis Green coached the Ottawa Senators last year. He coached a very well physical, kind of defensive type of game that I feel like they did a really good job. And I think that that was something that you could really pull out of that year and be like, yeah, Green was a really good acquisition, when a lot of Senators fans didn't really think he was going to be when he was initially hired, just because of his previous resume with Vancouver. But honestly, this management is one of the more underrated ones in the league, and I trust it. Looking at your key arrivals and key departures, we're going to put them in the same clip here because there's not a lot of players, only 7 total. You started with your key arrivals. You have Ole Lycksell, Lars Eller, Arthur Kaliev, and Jordan Spence are the guys who were newly acquired to this roster. Also, shout out to guys like Hunter Shepard, who was also acquired as well, who for some reason was not on my list. I'm just realizing that just now. But regardless, Ole Lycksell will be a decent depth forward. He's not going to play a lot. He'll be with Belleville most of the season, even as a Flyers fan who saw him. I think he was good, but I just don't know. Like, Ottawa's left wing side is a little deep. I do wonder, though, like he could make it over Nick Cousins, but obviously we'll see. Lars Eller will be a good fourth liner. That's a really good acquisition. Ottawa, one of the things they lacked with was depth, and I feel like getting a guy like Eller really improves that. And honestly, the same with Arthur Kaliev. There's not a lot of risk to that. You know, Kaliev has had some okay seasons with LA. I think that him coming over to Ottawa, he could be a good acquisition and a good guy who could fit in well in your bottom six. And then you have Jordan Spence, who is likely going to be a second or third pairing defenseman on that right shot side. That is a phenomenal add because they got him as a young and up-and-coming defensive guy for just draft picks. And I feel like for a team like Ottawa, draft picks don't really have that much significance. I mean, they lost their first and they don't really care. I'm kidding. Anyways, I think that overall, these are really good acquisitions for the Ottawa Senators. And their departures, I think, are guys like who were kind of liabilities to the team, if I'm being honest with you. You have Adam Gaudette, Anton Forsberg, and Travis Hamonic. Now, Gaudette, I will say he was not a liability. Gaudette was great last year for Ottawa. He had a career high in goals. He was one of those guys in like that bottom six role that was playing very well. He is now off to San Jose. I think he will do great things there with that team. That'll be exciting to watch. We'll cover them in the next couple of days. Forsberg, it just wasn't going to work out. I feel like with the way that Ottawa's goalie system is looking, Forsberg would have been fourth or fifth on that list. So overall, it just wasn't working out. He had to go elsewhere to find a better endeavor. And then Travis Hamonic was even like a seventh defenseman, and he was being paid like 1.25 or something like that. Like, he was way overpaid. He was not one of Steve Staios' guys, so he was bound to leave at some point. But those are your arrivals and departures for the Senators. Overall, I think they had a under the radar but still a good offseason for sure. So let's take a look at your depth chart for the Ottawa Senators. You start off on your left wing side. First and foremost, this is from the Hockey News. This is not from me. This is not my own personal depth chart. This is so I don't forget anybody. You have Brady Tkachuk, David Perron, Ridley Gregg, Nick Cousins rounding out your first forward, and you have Ole Lykesell as your extra forward there on the left wing side. So Brady Tkachuk is Brady Tkachuk. He's got that physical sense to him. He's got that offensive sense to him. Great captain. There's really nothing there that I want to say. There have been so much criticisms on the internet from Leaf fans, Canadiens fans, other fans around the league saying that Tkachuk is not a good captain. That's a lie. He is a great captain. David Perron was one of those guys last year who they acquired, and I forgot to mention him when I was talking about Staios. That was a really good ad. And Perron was one of those few guys in that Senators team that had playoff experience prior to this past year. So I think, again, like, he proved to be a very good acquisition. Ridley Gregg, I'm expecting a big season from. Has been that little bit of like a physical, hardworking offensive forward there. I need to see some more offense, though. And then Nick Cousins is purely there for physicality. He's a fighter. He's known to get under people's skin. So honestly, that's not a bad guy there. And then again, Lykesell can provide some offense. He is going to be more or less an AHLer this year, in my opinion. Maybe he plays, but I don't know. And then your center core, you have Tim Stützle, Nick Cousins, Shane Pinto, Lars Eller, and then Stephen Halliday as your extra forward there. So Stützle, great center, great number 1C. I got no qualms about him. Dylan Cousins should be fun. He's one of my sleeper players. I think he's going to be entertaining this year. I think with him around some legitimate guys on this roster and on that power play, I think he's going to do some damage and do very good. So I'm looking forward to that. Shane Pinto was solid last year. I'm expecting more, though. I need to see some more out of Shane Pinto. I've been seeing that he's been like a breakout candidate for a lot of people. I need to see some more. So I'm hoping that we'd see that this year. And then again, Eller, one of the newer acquisitions. I think he's going to fit in well there as a 4th C. And then Halliday, one of the Senators' touted forward prospects. He's got some good moves ahead of him as well. On your right wing side, you have Drake Batherson, Claude Giroux, Fabian Zetterlund, and Michael Amadio rounding out your first forward. Then you have Arthur Kaliev as your extra forward there on the right wing side. Batherson, good offensive player. I've seen rumors of like them maybe wanting to move away from him. I don't get that, but I mean, if they find somebody who's better, I guess you'll have to see. Claude Giroux is a little bit on the decline. He is a little bit older, so definitely you want to keep an eye on that. But I do think that a guy like Giroux will still provide offense for this team. He's a good veteran player. He's one of my favorite players of all time, too, as a Flyers fan, so I'll be rooting for Giroux for sure. Zetterlund will be a good middle sixer, could be a good power play 2 type of player. It felt like he was getting like 4th line minutes in Ottawa. I'm expecting for him to get much more time this year. And then Amadio, good 4th liner, nothing really wrong with him. And then Kaliev, again, kind of the same thing. There's no risk to him that much, so I like this forward core. I think the top 6 is very solid. The bottom 6, I think, is a lot of players who I'm expecting some big seasons from. So we'll see what happens there. But overall, this is a pretty good forward core. You look at your defense core for the Ottawa Senators. You start off on your left shot side. Jake Sanderson, Thomas Chabot, and Tyler Kleven are your 3 guys. Then you have Jorian Donovan as your extra guy there on the left shot side. So Sanderson is Sanderson. He is awesome. He is a top 15 defenseman, I believe. I have him on my rankings. He is just great to watch. And you have to see it to believe it. This kid is just absolutely phenomenal. There's no question about it whatsoever. He is great. Thomas Chabot, kind of the same thing. Again, like, Chabot is definitely a little bit worse than he's been in times in his career, but he's still a very serviceable second pairing defenseman, and he's been there through all of it with the Ottawa Senators. That's something you want to keep in mind there as well. Tyler Kleven, I think he's a good, young, and good defensive defenseman. He's been somebody who's fit in very well on that second or third pairing. And then Donovan, I think, played some games last year. He was one of their, like, RFAs who just signed. Nothing really much to say there on Donovan. On your right shot side, you have Artem Zub, Nick Jensen with an asterisk, and then Jordan Spence. Then you have Nicholas Montempalo and Carter Yakimchuk as your extra guys there. So Artem Zub, great defensive defenseman, is one of those guys who can just lock it down on that defensive side. He is the great, like, 1-2 to Jake Sanderson. And then Jensen, I have been seeing some rumors that he might not be there for the start of the season, so I just want to keep that in mind. Jordan Spence, again, as I mentioned, will be a great, young, up-and-coming kind of 2-way, more defensive-leaning defender. I like this guy. And I think that he could be one of those guys who is one of the more sneaky and one of the best acquisitions this offseason overall, honestly. And then you have, for your extra guys, Montempalo, with the injuries last year, played a lot. And not to mention he played in the Four Nations face-off for Finland just because of how weak their blue line was with the injuries and such. So he's somebody who I think could be interesting. And then Yakimchuk, you got to put him in there. You got to at least consider him. He almost made the team last year out of training camp. I don't know if he does this year just because of that right shot side. But honestly, if he can, he will. So I definitely think that's a factor there. But overall, this defensive core, very strong top 4. And it's much more deeper than it's been in previous years. Now you look at your goalies for the Senators. You start off with Linus Ullmark. You have Leevi Merilainen, Mads Søgaard, and then Hunter Shepard. This is pretty deep. I would argue Shepard should be there over Søgaard, but that's just my opinion. Anywho, Ullmark is Ullmark. He was great last year for Ottawa. Was a big part and a key part in why Ottawa made the playoffs. Again, I know I'm going to get into the other guy in a second, but Ullmark, when he was playing, he was awesome. But when he got injured, Leevi Merilainen came in and played some phenomenal goaltending. This was a guy who I think if he's not there, Ottawa might not make the playoffs. We're talking about Columbus being in that spot over them. That's what we are. That's what we're at this point. If it weren't for Merilainen coming in there and playing some great hockey for them. So he's a guy you can rely on there, and he is going to be the backup most likely this season. Søgaard, not a bad third string. And then Shepard, Calder Cup champion, back-to-back years. He will get some games. He has to. So I don't have any doubts there with that. But regardless, your goaltending is pretty deep, and it's much better than it's been in previous years, because I remember when we were talking about Ottawa over the last couple of seasons, the biggest thing we've mentioned is their goaltending. So obviously I'm looking forward to seeing how it's going to be this year, but it is much better than it was 24 months ago. Now on to your biggest questions facing the Senators this season. So the one that I'm really talking about is the 5v5. Will the 5v5 scoring improve? They were ranked 31st. They were ranked second to last in 5v5 goals last year. If this team wants to make it into a divisional spot, or even honestly make the playoffs again, their 5v5 needs to improve. They can't rely on really good defense and really good goaltending. And I know that, obviously, they will have good goaltending and good defense, but they need to score. That's the biggest thing that this team has dealt with. And then my second question kind of ties into that. How will the depth do? The depth was a big part on Ottawa last year. You could always use some more depth. I think that they have the pieces here to really put together a good depth chart, but these guys need to play. Like, Pinto needs to have a step. Greg needs to take a step. Zetterlund needs to produce as well. Overall, I feel like this offensive depth is much better than it was last year, with the adds of guys like Eller and Kaliev and Zetterlund being there for a full season, and the hope of Greg and Pinto taking steps. I think that that's going to happen, and I think that both of those things will improve for sure, but it doesn't just come from the forward core. The defense needs to score some goals there too. They need to help as well. So again, I think that that will happen, but overall it's definitely something Ottawa needs to improve upon next year. Now we're on to one of our biggest questions facing the Ottawa Senators. Playoffs, standings, cup. So I think that Ottawa will finish around where they did last year. I think they could be a little bit better, but I think they finish around where they were last year, and that is 4th in the Atlantic Division, taking that first wild card spot. They were just behind Florida. So I do want to preface that, like, they were right behind Florida for that first spot. But again, I think playoffs are also going to happen too. I'm not saying that that won't happen. That will definitely happen. But again, as I just said in the previous clip, the biggest thing that needs to happen for Ottawa is they need to improve their 5v5 scoring. They will not make the playoffs next year if that doesn't improve. If it gets worse, they definitely won't make it. If it stays the same, maybe. But again, I'm not very high upon it. So I do want to just say that I think that this team is very good. I think this team on paper has a very solid roster, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to come here in the next couple of seasons. So we'll have to see. But again, as I said at the beginning, Ottawa is coming into a brand new era of hockey. It was almost 10 years ago where the last time they made the playoffs before last year, where Chris Kunitz ended their dreams in 2017. They went through this rebuild. They went through some very hard times. They are now in a new chapter of their franchise. And honestly, I'm looking forward to it. Again, I got my friend LeBlanc James, who was on the podcast of the MVP. We've been talking about Ottawa for a long time. I'm looking forward to talking about them for the next decade, and hopefully we see some cups get raised there. But regardless, that'll do it for me. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like the video down below and subscribe if you are new. But regardless, that is it for me for this video. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.